Hello everyone, Joy Baglio here of Pioneer Valley Writers Workshop, and I want to talk a little bit about writer's block and some things that we can do as writers when we are stuck and when things aren't going the way we want, when things are not flowing. I've been here at an 18-day writing residency at Ragdale, and it's been absolutely incredible, but of course there are still periods when things are not flowing, when I feel stuck. So I want to talk about some things that I like to do when the words are not coming the way I want them to. A quick note on writer's block. I'm not a full believer that it even really exists. I think that what often happens is we get really stubborn about the way we think things should be going in whatever we're working on. We want this particular scene to come together. We want this plot problem to be solved. So we get an agenda about what we want the work to be doing in that particular moment. And I think that's the origins of writer's block, in that we feel blocked in a very particular way that we are setting out to do. When in reality, words aren't flowing in the book, there's still a number of other ways you can engage with it. There's a number of other ways you can work on it. So the first thing that I try to do when I'm feeling stuck on a very particular aspect of my writing is I pivot away from that thing I'm trying to do. It's often moving plot forward. It's often working on a scene. And I do something that seems to require a different part of my brain, which is a much more left-brained side, and that is outline. I outline, I make beat sheets, I figure out the order or structure of scenes. And what I do is I actually have a couple different kinds of outlines. I have a master outline that has all of the major happenings in each chapter throughout the whole book, or in each section if you want to not break them into chapters yet. And then I have a shorter outline that has the main beats, the big sort of narrative moments throughout the book. I'm not trying to get involved yet in my own process with the technical terms that these things might be called. I don't use terms like inciting incident, midpoint. I don't want that language entering into my process because it starts to make me feel like I'm doing something that isn't as connected to the story, and it starts to make me a little more nervous. So I just keep my outlines structured in a way that they help me the most. And that really takes me out of the stuck place that I've been in. Because anytime you are changing your brain's focus or task, there's a different kind of flow that can happen. Now there's a flow about problem solving. The second thing I do is I journal or write about the story, about the novel, or about the project, not in it. And there's a kind of flow that happens separately from the work inside the novel. So something that's helped me is, say, for the 3-act structure novel that I'm working on, is I will write a paragraph, or I'll just journal about each of those 3 sections of the novel. And I will write in a paragraph everything I know about section 1, just kind of word vomit it out. Then I'll write everything I know about section 2. This doesn't have to be great. It probably isn't. It's kind of me talking out loud to myself about what this story is. And I find that can really open up flow. It can help you engage with the story in a way where you're not actually having to make it be good. You're not going to mess it up because you're just journaling for yourself. Another thing that it can do is it can reveal where things actually are feeling a little sticky for yourself. So you're essentially talking to yourself about your novel, you're journaling about it, but if you're starting to find yourself over justifying something or having trouble even explaining it to yourself, then that tells you something also. Another version of this journaling about the project is to journal from the point of view of different characters in your story, whether it is novel or memoir. This also doesn't have to be connected in any way to the events of the story. You could take a character and have them journal looking back on events of the book. It could be years and years later. You could take a character in childhood and have them journal about how their life is then, before the events of the book happen. So there's lots of ways you can play with where you set your journaling in time if you're doing this from the point of view of characters. And this can also be a wonderful way to connect with your characters in a way that doesn't feel high stakes to you as a writer, because this doesn't have to and probably won't enter into your project unless, of course, you end up writing something which can happen, and I've seen this happen with this exercise. It really does work amazingly in your project, and then you lowered the bar for yourself in a way that allowed you to do that. But just make sure that when you do this journaling, you don't pressure yourself to make it feel good, because part of what this is giving yourself permission to interact with your characters and your story in a way that doesn't carry the same weight or stakes for you. And I think that's really important to maintaining flow when working on something like a book that needs to be sustained over a longer period of time. The third thing that I have begun thinking about when I'm stuck is I try to redefine the task or the goal, or in some way lower the bar for myself about what I'm trying to do. This is kind of related to what I said initially. When I'm stuck, and I imagine this is true for a lot of writers, it's often because there's a big thing that I'm trying to figure out, or that I'm hoping something big will come together, or it's a plot impossibility that feels really big and major, and it's broken my stride forward with the story. But the issue can sometimes be how you define the goal of what you're trying to do. That maybe the bar is too high, and of course it is feeling like you're failing because what you're trying to do is just hard. So some ways that I lower the bar for myself when I'm feeling like this, or when things aren't flowing, when I just can't go forward anymore with what I'm doing, is I redefine what I'm trying to do. Maybe it's a goal that is connected in some way to the old one. So for example, if I'm stuck on a scene that is pretty significant, one way to lower the bar might be, instead of that whole scene, let's work on the first paragraph, and let's try to make that first paragraph as tight as possible. Opening sentences of paragraphs and of sections or chapters are almost always great places to go when you're feeling stuck on something bigger, because they are always so important to maintaining flow, and they're so important in the big scheme of the book, how things transition between one paragraph to the next, between one section to the next, the start of a chapter, the first sentence of a chapter, how you hook readers, the last sentence of a chapter. So knowing these key areas that are lower bar areas where you can work when you're feeling stuck on the big flow has really, really helped me. I will work on a first sentence for a chapter or a paragraph, and it's a very straightforward task. It sometimes looks like writing 10 different versions of one sentence and then playing with the sound of each sentence. What sounds better to the ear? What hooks more? Is one of these sentences more visual? So it becomes a different kind of task for the brain that I think is, for most people, a lot easier. It's a lot easier to decide if a sentence is working than if a whole section of a book is working. So switching gears, going to a lower bar task is really, really important when you're feeling stuck. Again, going back to the initial ideas about writer's block, I think that what that can be oftentimes is the disparity that develops between what we set as our goal and what we actually are able to do in a human amount of time. So when those things are really mismatched, when we are setting our goal to be really large, we're asking ourselves to do something that is really hard in probably an unnatural amount of time to do it, then it can create the narrative that we tell ourselves of I'm blocked, I'm stuck, I've failed at this. And that narrative reinforces itself in our brains every time we feel that. So I think it's important, in order to just develop more states of flow in your work, to make sure you are giving yourselves tasks that have a low enough bar that you can accomplish them, or you can get close, or you can at least be feeling like you're not sitting there staring at a blank screen because the task is so large, so hard. The last thing I do when I'm feeling stuck is I take a break and I move my body in some way. I do something physical. And I think that there is some huge connection between movement and the way ideas generate, the way they come to us. I'm not the only writer who has said this. I know a lot of writers who've talked about exercise and movement as really, really important to this process, and that somehow that's often where ideas come. They come when you leave the desk, when you're sweating, you're doing something totally different, and yet our brains are still a little bit still figuring out whatever we were thinking about. So that kind of thing, when it happens, feels really good. When the ideas come in that way, it feels like you are strengthening a process that doesn't just involve you sitting at the desk, that the process goes beyond the desk. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope that you try some of these ideas, and If there's something else you do when you're stuck that really works, please share below in the comments and other people can check out what works for you.